Well, thank you, Lee. Just to start out, what you said there with that posting from Forest with Brooks said about timber investments, long term they are. I mean, they're sustainable and they've always been good investments. They've been low risk investments, and I don't see that changing. I mean, we're going to go through our up and down years like this year, but kind of going into this year, we kind of had a feeling that it wasn't going to be the same, just because one, it's election year. So typically during election years, we tend to see a lot of variability in industry and a lot of variability in timber markets and so forth, just based off politics. But with that being said, we had COVID-19 thrown into the mix. So I do have a little bit of insight. Like I said, I don't have a magic ball. I can't tell you what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, but I do have some indicators I want to talk about and discuss, and I'll go through that with you. I'll give you a little update on kind of where we were going into kind of pre-COVID-19, pre-coronavirus, and then kind of talk about how that has been thrown into the mix and kind of what we're likely to see going forward with that. So I do have a couple slides I'm going to share with you as I go, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have moving forward as well. I'm not sure I'll be able to see everybody's hand raised, or if you have a question. So if you want to stop me, feel free. And if you want to save your question till the end, that's fine too. Whatever works for you is perfectly fine with me. But I do give quite a bit of talks. I speak to different groups about timber markets in Alabama, and I like to really just provide kind of the current situation in the state and the current conditions of the forest industry in Alabama, and then I get into some market indicators. And what I would really like to focus on a lot of times is kind of long-term trends and what we've seen in the past and kind of what we can expect going forward and what we've learned from those, history basically. And then tonight, I really just want to key in on those indicators that we look at as economists to kind of help tell that story, where we're going and what to look for, and then leave you with a few other things that's happening around the state and around the Southeast there before I open it up for questions. But some of you may have heard me speak. I do speak at Alabama Forest Owners Association meetings quite a bit, and I've probably seen some of you at some other meetings. But I do, like I said, I keep up with forestry facts, and these are kind of lagged just because we're still getting the 2019 numbers in right now. So what I have completely up to date in terms of kind of the industry is completed up through 2018. We're still working on the 2019 numbers. So they are a little bit behind, but we don't usually see that much variability. It stays pretty steady going forward. But as a whole, Alabama is very well off in terms of timber in the state and forest land. About over 71% of our state is made up of forest land, and approximately 98–99% of that forest land is actually productive timberland. So we have a lot of forest resource out there in the state. Majority of our timberland is privately owned. That 94% there that you see in the screen, that includes 6% of industry, and then the rest of that is non-industrial private landowners in the state of Alabama. So if you look at the 48 states, lower 48 states, we rank third in timberland acreage, and we rank second in private timberland acreage. In terms of private timberland acreage, we're only behind Georgia. And then in total timberland acreage in the lower 48 states, we're behind Georgia and Oregon. So we do have a fantastic resource there, and it's a big industry for the state. In terms of what's currently out there on the stump, and like I said, this is compiled up through 2018. We don't expect this to change much once we finish the 2019 numbers, but approximately half of everything standing out there is saw timber size class or greater in the state of Alabama that's listed as timberland. About nearly 30% is considered pulpwood, and then the remaining 22% is your seedlings and saplings. So we have a lot of big trees on the stump, which is part of the supply issue that I'll talk about a little bit later on in the presentation here in a few minutes. So that's kind of what our makeup looks like in terms of product class that's currently standing. If you can see this figure on the right, that's actually what our harvest totals were, what we harvested through 2018. This is from the Alabama Forestry Commission and what they recorded. So nearly 60% of everything we harvested in 2018 was pulpwood size class. That's both hardwood and softwood. Softwood does make up the majority of that percentage though. What I can say about this is this doesn't change very often. We rarely see, you may see it swing a percent here, a percent there, but this is pretty steady on what we typically harvest in terms of product class. A lot of pulpwood, then we come in behind that with nearly 40% of it being pine saw timber, and then it drops off significantly with poles and hardwood saw timber in the mix. But as an industry as a whole, you know, we're over a $21 billion industry in the state that includes both production and processing. We produce nearly 42,000 jobs. We're second in the US in pulp and paper production and 6th for both lumber and wood panel production in the United States. So we have a very healthy, very strong industry in the state of Alabama that I don't see going anywhere anytime soon. Like I said, we have these hiccups. I'll turn my attention more towards the kind of the market conditions and the prices for, you know, stumpage prices and so forth, and what kind of drives those prices and why they've been kind of suppressed over the last, you know, decade or so really. But as an industry as a whole, it's really kind of trucking right along. And a lot of that is, you can be seen here in this figure. This is new expanding capital investments that are coming into the state of Alabama from basically the housing market crash in 2008 up through 2018. So over the last decade or so. In 2018 alone, we surpassed $1.3 billion in capital investment in the forest industry alone in the state of Alabama. And that includes both new operations, new companies, new mills, et cetera, that are coming in, but also updates and investing and expanding what we currently have in our infrastructure in the industry. So it is very healthy and was very healthy going into you know, the latter part of that decade. And you can see kind of where the housing market crash was and then when we really started to turn around. So I want to turn my attention more on kind of, you know, the biggest thing I get, especially with landowners, is stumpage prices and what's affecting market conditions and why they're still suppressed. We have all the indications of a strong industry. I mentioned the capital investments. I mentioned the, you know, the housing market was strong going into most of the last 4 or 5 years, to be perfectly honest with you. But we just simply, what's suppressing those stumpage values really comes down to 3 main things in the state. One is the housing market, which has been on our side lately, and I'll talk a little bit more about, you know, what we expect from COVID-19 and the coronavirus with that. The supply of timber is a big one right now. We have an oversupply of timber in the state, and it takes a long time to catch up, so that has a negative impact on our demand, and it's being reflected in stumpage values, basically the bottom line. And then when I talk about competition here on the right side, what I'm talking about is nothing like landowner competition, nothing like product competition. This is mill-to-mill competition in the state, and we lack that. We still need more infrastructure, we need more mills, and we need more mill competition to really help eat up some of that supply, but also help drive those prices. You know, the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, a lot of the mills in the state, they've been, you know, for lack of a better term, fat and happy. They get as much wood as they want, and they be able to produce as much as they want, and they haven't really had to fight over it. So that's another thing that's kind of helping suppress those prices. But if you really look from a landowner standpoint, we have 2 scales that we focus on, the large scale and the local scale. The large scale is going to be the big swings that we see, kind of the longer term stuff that's going to be impacted, and that's your economy, the housing market, trade policies, which has been a big one lately. The demand for products, obviously at both the local scale and even national or global scale, the supply of timber, and then you know at even a finer scale, at both the larger scale and local scale, you're going to have effects of seasonality and weather, whether it's is the timber accessible or not? Is it too wet? Is it dry? If it's really dry out there, and this can be region wide, this can be nationwide at times, when there's a lot of accessibility and a lot of timber that's able to get reached to, that's going to dampen prices as well. So the big thing in Alabama prior to COVID-19 is we've had a very strong industry. We had a very strong housing market. What really was kind of negatively affecting those prices that we're seeing are supply of timber and the competition, the mill-to-mill competition going forward. The good news is we've had those capital investments. So there's new mills opening up every day in the state. They're up till, recently, we haven't heard anything, but up through 2019, we've had more and more mills opening up. I have been able to keep up with several of them that continue to move forward with those mills, even through current situations. And we've also seen advancements in terms of increasing, the efficiency and the capacity of those mills that we currently have, which are all good things in terms of helping with that supply and the competition for that wood going forward. But, one second, I got something popped up there. And in a sense, going into 2020, stumpage prices alone, even mill deliver prices that we're looking at, they were kind of gaining traction. I want to say they were coming back, but compared to 2019, they started off pretty good going in the first of the year. We did see a decrease in our hardwood markets, which was driven by the global trade, especially with China. So we did see a decrease in that. Both saw timber and pulpwood, hardwood did decrease as it related to trade, but the trade's looking better. Forest Products is in that first phase one of that agreement and that deal signed, and it specifically mentions hardwood products, which is a big deal for Alabama because a lot of our hardwood saw timber and high quality hardwood products are exported to China. So I don't see that being a long-term issue. I think that'll eventually be resolved, and a lot of that is based on politics alone. But in terms of the softwood markets, we did see a little better direction going into 2020 to start the quarter with saw timber, and it's not a lot. It's not a lot to kind of move that trend line, but they did start off a little higher than they were in 2019. But by the end of quarter one, and when COVID-19, that basically pretty much stopped that. And we started to see a decrease in those stumpage values as a result of COVID-19. And I will basically come across here and talk a little bit about what we expect as a direct result of COVID-19. It has affected production and overall wood demand in the state and the Southeast, to be perfectly honest with you. Despite a real wet quarter one, which we expected to help with the timber prices, our supply was constrained due to that. We got hit with COVID-19, basically, is what happened, and it kind of hampered it and depressed it and kept it down. Residential building and construction and the economy going into quarter one and starting off in 2020 prior to the outbreak were significant. They were actually higher than what we saw in 2019, and new home starts were higher. But since then, that's kind of slowed down a little bit. I do expect that to kind of continue to slow down as we move forward, and at least until we start to get a better feel of what these impacts are going to be in 2019. COVID-19 really hampered our supply chain, and not just the forestry supply chain, but supply chains all across our country and all our different industries. And they've had to switch gears. They've had to produce products that they're not normally producing or hauling to meet that demand and that outbreak. So there has been a curtail in production in many forest product manufacturers, not just in Alabama, but across the Southeast and across the country. that, I expect is not going to be long term. It's just going to, until we get back to more normal conditions, everything's kind of on hold right now and what they're doing. The one thing that's not on hold is kind of our pulpwood products, especially our sanitary paper and basically everything that's pulp and paper related, except for, writing in newsprint and newspress is still strong. It's operating still at max capacity. A lot of the mills, with the exception of probably just a few, are still planning to operate at max capacity to meet that demand for those products. The one thing with that is, how high the ceiling can go. And the problem with that is most of our pulpwood mills, most of our mills that are producing those type of products, they were already at capacity prior to this. So they don't have a lot more growth they can do without capital investment. And a lot of the capital investments, like I mentioned, everything that has been planned and has been in the works for 2020, 2021 has kind of right now, they're just on hold until they learn more about what's going to happen with, the economy and COVID-19 going forward. But everything was in very good shape prior to this. And I think, looking at this in terms of, and I'm going to talk about the housing market in a minute, but in terms of some of those aspects, it's going to be a bump in the road. It's just how long is that going to be before we come back around? The housing market is going to be the big bubble that kind of oversees everything in terms of how fast that and how long that bump in the road is. The things like the supply chain and COVID itself and what's going on with some of these curtailed productions, that's all going to funnel back basically to the housing market. And that's where I'm talking right here in terms of the housing market. Historically, we've had low rates recently, basically since the housing market crash in 2008, we haven't had rates that have much surpassed 5%, 5.5%. They have decreased since COVID. I continue to think they're going to remain low. They're going to keep those low, especially to try and help the economy come back going forward. The biggest thing with the housing market on this slide that you see is we do still have housing affordability that's good. There is starting to be a little bit of a shortage nationwide. A lot of that stemming from labor shortage and lot availability. So it's still a buyer's market. It's still a high demand for housing in the U.S. It's just how long is this going to impact and prevent those buyers from buying, and how big of an impact are they going to have? We do have unemployment due to COVID-19, so there are going to be a few less buyers going forward. But the biggest thing and the key here of how big the housing market is going to play as a result of this is going to be the mortgage lenders and the payments. How many payments are going to be suspended? How much money do those mortgage lenders are going to have to continue to lend out? That's going to be the key of how long the housing market's going to, how it's going to reflect this impact, basically. When you look at historically, when you look at pandemics in the United States and how it affects the housing market, they don't significantly swing the housing market that often. And what it comes down to is how severe we are in terms of mortgage lenders and potential buyers. So if we continue down the unemployment rate being very low and we start seeing homes and mortgage lenders have suspended payments and they're not able to lend out money, that could be something that is very concerning. But that's going to be what, it's unknown how long this is going to play out, how big of an impact that's going to have. But that's something to keep an eye on, because that's what's going to take the longest for the housing market. How deep is it going to go, and how long is it going to be able to crawl out of that is going to really revolve around unemployment and those mortgage rates, those mortgage lenders, and who can buy what and how many buyers we have. So that's what we're looking at in terms of the housing market. It's very strong still. Like I said, the demand is still there, which is kind of crazy, to be perfectly honest with you. But it's just how much longer, when are we going to run out of buyers? And, we do, everything I've been reading, everything I've been hearing about says that remodeling should rebound as soon as we lessen some of these stay-at-home restrictions. So that's usually the first thing that comes back. So we do expect to see that, which is going to help with this little bit of a setback. It's just, 2020 in the whole it's going to be variable. It's going to be It's going to be, something that, we're not sure what's going to happen. We expected some up and down. We expected this to be an unusual year to begin with. And now you throw COVID-19 in the mix, and we just got to see how big of a deal this becomes, because we have to get the economy back rolling. We got to get the wheels back spinning, and we got to get some of this ground made up. It's just, depends on how big of a hit the housing market takes. And right now we're still okay. We got to wait and see what happens, long term. And I don't have the magic ball on that, but if it's me, I'm keeping up with those suspensions and, mortgage, and, how easy it is to get loans, and then the unemployment going forward. How quickly can we get those jobs back? The labor shortage is another issue. I can tell you right now, we're also being impacted in the forest industry from that standpoint. So the biggest one, basically, you have the housing market, and you have curtailed production with some of the sawmills and so forth. The bright spot being, kind of your pulpwood and your paper products are still remaining strong, and remodeling should rebound as soon as people start moving around again. The one thing that is concerned is the labor shortage. And, one thing to think about long term is we've had a labor shortage during planting season. We haven't been able to plant as much trees because of the labor from overseas. Your migrant labor workers have been kind of suspended. It's been difficult to get them. So, long-term effects, what are we looking at in terms of the labor shortage and what we're going to deal with there going forward, not just currently what we have and when we get back going. So that has a lot to do with it as well. But that's not just affecting tree planting, it's affecting other silviculture activities, management, on larger tracts of land as well that use those workers. So that's something else to pay attention to going forward. In terms of some other notes, I will say that softwood lumber capacity in the South is increasing as a whole. We have those both new and improved mills that are opening up all across the South, which is going to help, including Alabama. We do have a logging employment decline. This wasn't a result of COVID. This is something that's been in the works for the last several years. It's just that next generation of loggers, where they're going to come from. The trucking issue as well. We just have less of them, and it's harder to get truck drivers. So those are some long-term things that that we got to, keep an eye on in the forest industry as a whole. Softwood lumber production is forecasted to increase across the South. So if you're looking at Alabama alone, we do have the second highest demand for pine grade lumber in the South. And we have, in terms of pine pulpwood demand, we're the third highest in the South. And we continue to think, that's gonna continue on. It's just, we've done all we can, and we've worked very hard to come back from where we were in 2008. This is just going to be another one of those roadblocks as we keep going. It's not going to stop anything. I don't think it's gonna wipe anything out. Depending on the severity of some of those things I mentioned, I think it's just one of those setbacks. Our industry, the foundation's there. We have everything in place to remain strong. It's just we got to get the wheels turning again. To keep that going. This is just one of those things that happen that no one could predict, and we just got to come back from it. It may slow down our rebound from where we were headed, obviously, but it's just one of those things. It's not long term. It's not going to destroy the forest industry in the South or Alabama for that matter. So just to recap a little bit, the timber industry is strong. It's likely to continue in the years to come. Like I said, I don't see this being a long-term issue. Demand increasing for timber products. When I say long-term, I'm talking about something that's going to drastically alter and change our industry. You're likely to see a very variable, unpredictable 2020 to say the least, and it may even dwindle into 2021. That we don't know that. I can't say that for sure, but it's really up to how this plays out the rest of the year. But even with the election and the COVID-19, 2020 is going to be an asterisk year, to say the least. Demand increasing, for timber products prior to COVID-19. It's just, what's going to happen with the housing market. Are we just going to pick back up and continue to grow when this is over, and when it's going to be over? Or, you know, how long is this setback going to be? And like I said, that's going to go back to the mortgage, and that's going to go back to your buyers and your unemployment. So how long that lasts. The biggest issues, though, if you move COVID-19 aside, is still for Alabama is the surplus of timber on the stump and the mill competition. That's what was kind of, our industry was there. It's strong. It's just those were the things that were still, you know, building up to help with those prices and those markets. And we're going to need some help. And one thing I do want to mention before I finish here, I don't want to take much more of your time, but CLT, for those of you who haven't heard of it, it's cross-laminated timber. It is in Alabama, and it's not new to the world. It's been in Europe. It's been in Canada. It's even been in the Pacific Northwest. But we need some help with finding new markets for some of that big timber and that we have on the stump. And this is something that has the potential to do that for us. They just opened a mill in Dothan, Alabama, Smart Lam USA, and they're building cross-laminated timber, and they're using it for construction processes. And basically, the best way I can explain it is it's kind of like you send them a blueprint of what you need built. They cut everything to specification. They haul it in pieces. And it's kind of like Legos. When they get to the site, they can put it together and it's done. And it takes a lot of saw timber quality trees to do that, high quality lumber to do that. And it has the potential to eat a lot of that supply up. And it's something that is growing, not just in the state, but in the country, that has a potential long term. There's a lot of effort, a lot of resources going in the research and outreach of CLT right now in Alabama. And with the Dothan being chosen as the first plant in the Southeast to produce this, it is a pretty bright spot going forward. I think has the potential to be very big for our forest industry going forward. And basically what they do is they take dimensional lumber, they pack it together in these big panels, and they can put up those buildings, you know, build hotels, they build high rises out of it. And it hasn't got into the residential market yet, but the plan is that that's where it's headed. There's approximately, I mean, there's probably more than that now. There's at least 500 different projects going underway with mass timber. We're actually going to have several in Auburn, a couple on campus, one at the Crair Preserve that eventually will be put up that you can see, that'll demonstrate and highlight the efficiency, the use of wood in building structures like that. And campuses have really kind of adopted that going forward. So that has a big potential, and not just Alabama, but the forest industry in the U.S. as well to really help us out, especially here with the supply issues that we have. But I just wanted to bring that to your attention. We do have a lot of bright stuff still ahead of us. Like I said, a lot of the companies right now are curtailing production, but that's because of the supply chain issues and having to turn their resources to other things right now during COVID-19. But I imagine that's going to come back once we get this behind us. It's just, the biggest thing is, with anything else with the forest industry, it's how big of a hit the housing market's going to take. And hopefully it's one that we can bounce back from rather quickly. But with that, I'll take any questions you may have.